Hi, I'm Jonathan Ray, and I own the Plaza Theater. George LaFont was responsible for bringing independent cinema to Atlanta, really. Like, he owned a handful of theaters across the city, and he was the only one showing independent films and only one showing foreign films. So I think that guy deserves a lot of credit for the film scene in Atlanta now, because who would have seen those things without him? We decided, let's make a phone call and see what George wants for the place, just on a whim. So we called him. Then we ended up in a meeting with his broker and, toured the place and just really thought about it. And then we were like, it was kind of one step at a time. We never really set out to buy it. Then we went to the bank and asked them how much money will you give us on my house, for a loan. And it just kept kind of moving and it just kind of was falling into place. So we said, let's just do it. I don't know. We didn't think about it too much, which is probably a bad idea. Gail had experience running a movie theater. She ran a movie theater for 5 years in college, so she already had knowledge of how to run it.
I'm Gail Ray, and I own the Plaza Theater. Jonathan and I read in the newspaper, in the Creative Local, there was an article about Mr. LaFont had closed the theater, and a lot of bad stuff was going on in town at the time. I mean, just things were closing, and big giant chains were coming in, and it was almost like the last straw. We were like, no, Plaza's not closing.
I don't know, Atlanta at that time was to me, it seemed like it was going through a lot of changes. It was transitioning to kind of a more corporate and chain store. Just our neighborhood, that was always going on outside of this area, but it was really felt like it was starting to move in. Like a Starbucks was opening in Little Five Points. They're building a big Target, Best Buy, Lowe's thing on Moreland, that huge complex. Tortillas closed, Echo Lounge closing. It just really seemed like a lot of things I liked about this town or this area were going away, and the last thing I want to see is just a bunch of great stores and restaurants that I like being shut down because they can't compete with the national chains,
And I was a high school teacher at the time, and Jonathan's a full-time editor-producer. It was jumping into that, and still, I'd already signed a contract for the next year, so I was still teaching theater, high school theater. And all of a sudden we were owning the theater, and every day after school I was coming over here and working at the theater.
In 2010, the Plaza turned 70 years old. To fully appreciate the very special place that it has become to so many people, we must first take a look at its past.
The year was 1939. The place, Atlanta, Georgia. The Plaza Theater opened its doors as a 1,000-seat Art Deco cinema and live theater. Say, Mr. and Mrs. Atlanta, did you know the Plaza was designed by world-renowned architect George Harwell Bond? Well, now you do. And time marches on.
My name is Helen Griffith. My father built this, not only the cinema, but the whole complex. And when the theater opened, it was a grand occasion with spotlights from the city. And of course, I wasn't allowed to come, I was too young. But this time I got to come, and I'm so pleased, and having such a nice crowd and so many interested people from this neighborhood and all over the city that are interested in keeping the Plaza alive and operating and all the good things that it does for this neighborhood and this community.
I'm George LaFont, and I owned the Plaza Theater for about 25 years, starting in 1983. The actual theater, the shopping center itself was built in 1939, and it was the first shopping center in the state of Georgia. The shopping center being defined as anything with off-street parking. Hard to believe that until 1939 such a thing did not exist. But anyway, the Candler family developed it.
My grandmother grew up in Atlanta, in the Grant Park area, and she had her own neighborhood theater she went to, but we've had a lot of people come in here and say this was the theater that they grew up going to and seeing every movie. Just pretty cool to think about.
I'm Wilbur Fitzgerald. I'm one of those rare native Atlantans who grew up actually in this neighborhood, just in the Virginia Highland area. And the Plaza Theater was one of my theaters, always. This is one of the great old neighborhood theaters that just absolutely must be preserved. I have so many memories here. I came here with my parents so many times to see movies. Probably one of my most memorable moments was up here when they were having a drawing one night for a go-kart, and I was dying to have a go-kart. I think this was about 1959 or something like that. And I believe there was a Bridget Bardot movie or something playing up here, but I just begged my mother to come up here because I knew I was going to win that go-kart. They were going to have a drawing on the stage down here. And she gave in to me, and we came up here and saw the movie, and they had the drawing, and of course, I didn't win the go-kart. But the Plaza's just been such a part of my personal history, and I love it every time I set foot in this place.
None of the other theaters are still around. Like, this is the last neighborhood theater. Most of them have been turned into some other kind of, venue, but this ran as a neighborhood theater for 40 years until the neighborhood went downhill.
When this whole neighborhood changed, and it was pretty seedy on this street. There was drug dealers and prostitutes, and there was an adult bookstore next door, and so I guess to, give the people what they wanted at that point, it was a porn theater, adult feature films.
Yeah, now I never attended it back then, but I'll tell you, when I first saw the property in the early 80s, there was a ramp, a runway coming right down through the middle of the downstairs auditorium, where they were actually doing the old style burlesque with runways and so forth.
There was a stage running down the middle of the theater that they had live burlesque shows, which is pretty crazy because now we do burlesque shows here again. Thing is, nowadays it's so different than that. It's hardly, I don't know. Now it's just more performance. It's not really about the sex of it.
It became a XXX theater for a small time, less than a decade, but unfortunately that's what a lot of people remember about the Plaza. But I mostly remember George Lafont buying this theater and turning it into the place I came to see almost every great movie I saw in the 80s, 90s, either here at one of his other theaters, the Terra, Garden Hills, Screening Room. He really put the Plaza on the map for me and my generation.
I mean, the landlord owned this whole strip, and he just kicked out all the people who were running the adult bookstores and this theater and remodeled it, renovated it. And he was actually working with the city to try and clean this place up a little bit because it was sketchy. Then that's when he found George Lafont.
I first got involved with the Plaza Theater in 1983 when I opened it after a lengthy close. I had opened the theater to replace the silver screen, which was my prior theater showing old movies and retrospective double bills, which had closed down due to the lease that had expired. And I was looking all over town for a location where I could move the programming of the silver screen and keep it intact. And there was the Plaza Theater, this little jewel of a movie theater sitting there right on Ponce de Leon. It had been closed for many, many years, and I was able to secure a lease on the premises. The Candler family developed it, and I leased it from a gentleman named Bob Griffith. And Bob had the foresight to redevelop that whole thing and remodel and rehab the whole area, which had fallen into some disrepute at that time. But in 1983, we reopened, and the place looked great. The place had looked pretty seedy prior to the renovation of that whole strip, and when it got done, the real estate agents were all just thrilled about it.
My name is Maxwell Guberman, and the Plaza has been here ever since I can remember. You could go here on a date that you knew it wasn't going to work out, like the chemistry wasn't there, but you'd wind up seeing an amazing movie. I saw The Shawshank Redemption here 9 months after it had come out in the main theaters, but it was still playing. The date didn't really work out, but I'll never forget where I saw The Shawshank Redemption.